This is the story of the year 1914 when an 8-year-old child was playing in a village in Japan. Suddenly, he saw a machine moving on 4 wheels. It was Ford's Model T, and seeing it, the child was extremely surprised. That was the day when this 8-year-old boy developed a fascination for cars and mechanical parts for the first time. His name was Soichiro Honda, and who knew that in the coming time, we would see his name on every small and large car. Soichiro Honda was born in 1906 in a small village near Mount Fuji in Japan. His father was a blacksmith and also did cycle repair work part-time. Honda had 5 siblings who had already died due to various diseases, so his parents had a lot of expectations from him. But he had no interest in studies. Instead, Honda was more interested in repairing cycles with his father. At the age of 16, Honda saw a job advertisement in the newspaper. Art Shokai, an automobile service station in Tokyo, needed technicians. Honda wrote a letter to the company for the job, and fortunately, he received a positive reply. That was the time when Honda left his home and school with the hope of earning and headed to Tokyo. Honda's dream shattered when he reached Tokyo at Art Shokai. The owner of the company started making him do cleaning work and even put him on babysitting. Poor Honda, what could he do? On one hand, he had left his home and parents. On the other hand, he was being made to do useless tasks. He felt ashamed to go back to his village because he could not face his parents. That was the reason he was forced to do odd jobs there for many months. After a few months, the owner of Art Shokai also started taking workshop work from Honda. Honda had always been interested in this work, so he easily understood things. Within a few months, he had learned a lot about all kinds of cars and their parts. During this time, Art Shokai also made 2 sports cars. The first car was Art Daimler, and the second was Curtiss. Both of these cars were made using used engines and won the first position in the Japanese Motorcar Championship in 1924. Honda was still a good mechanic, but in this race, he sat as an engineer alongside the driver. That was the event after which Soichiro Honda made motorsports his religion. For the next several years, he continued to work at Art Shokai and increased his experience. In 1928, at the age of 22, his boss decided to open another branch. This branch was to be in Hamamatsu City, and the boss sent Honda there, entrusting him with the responsibility. Honda started this new branch of Art Shokai with 1 worker, and in just 2 years, expanded it to 30 workers. He had now become a brilliant mechanic and a racing driver as well. Taking advantage of his skills, he designed a sports car for his boss that could go up to 120 km/h, breaking all previous records. This record remained Japan's highest for the next 20 years. The owner of Art Shokai held Honda in even higher regard now. He wanted to open his own workshop, but perhaps fate had other plans. In 1936, during a race, Honda had a horrific accident. He survived, but his left arm was fractured, his shoulder dislocated, and he received several wounds on his face. He thought his life was over. He could neither work as a mechanic nor race. Months later, when he recovered, he requested the owner of Art Shokai that he could no longer work in repair, but instead suggested starting a separate company for manufacturing spare parts. The stakeholders of Art Shokai immediately rejected Honda's idea. They were already making profits, and no one wanted to take a new risk. At that point, Honda decided to start a company for manufacturing parts on his own. In 1936, at the age of 30, he founded Tokai Seiki Heavy Industry with a friend and made his friend Shichiro Kato its president. Though he had started the company, Honda had no investment to run it. He worked for Art Shokai during the day, while at night he tried to make engine pistons for his new company. He continued this routine for many months but did not achieve any success. Instead, he became weaker from working continuous shifts. One failure after another blocked his path. That's when he decided to gain expertise in metallurgy and enrolled in a university. In 1939, after 3 years of continuous hard work, he finally succeeded in making a piston. He quit his job at Art Shokai and devoted himself full-time to making pistons. However, he didn't know that the pistons he made still had many faults. When he offered his pistons to Toyota, they rejected 47 out of 50 designs. This news struck Honda like lightning because he had no way back. He started touring all of Japan to understand the requirements of different companies. He visited various factories, met with car manufacturers, and spent the next few years understanding the market. Then Honda made pistons again, and this time, they passed the quality control of all companies. He started receiving orders rapidly and once again saw his dreams coming true. To meet the orders, his company hired 2,000 workers. But Honda's happiness was short-lived, as who knew that in 1941, Japan would enter World War II, and the ministry took control of many Japanese companies, including Soichiro Honda's. Honda was downgraded to senior managing director of his own company. Things got worse when the company's workers were conscripted into military service. The next 3 years were extremely difficult, but in 1944, an event completely dashed Honda's hopes. During an air raid, a missile struck directly at Honda's factory. The situation in the country was getting worse. Japan was losing the war. Then, in 1945, 2 nuclear attacks devastated Japan. Japan surrendered to the Americans. The war was over, but Honda had lost everything. He sold his remaining assets to Toyota for 450,000 yen and found himself jobless once again. These conditions were not unique to Honda, but were a reflection of the severe crisis Japan was undergoing. The economy had melted down, and severe shortages of food and water, coupled with inflation, had broken everyone's back. Public transportation was extremely difficult to find because petrol had become scarce in Japan. During this time, Honda found a small engine from the Japanese Imperial Army used to power wireless radios. Driven by habit, an idea struck him. He thought about attaching this engine to a bicycle to solve his transportation problems. This would make transport easier and cheaper. He attached this engine to a bicycle, and everyone loved the idea, especially since people were already troubled by the high cost of living. He managed to find a few used engines, but the demand from people was so high that Honda decided to design his own new engine. This was the first time in history that a machine displayed the Honda logo. Honda didn't have enough money to produce these cycles on a mass scale. Therefore, he wrote an open letter to 18,000 shopkeepers. People had so much trust in Honda that 3,000 shopkeepers gave him a positive reply and even paid in advance. In the next 3 years, Honda produced a motorcycle that met the market's requirements perfectly. It was launched as the Super Cub, which immediately made a splash in the market. This model was so successful that by 1958, it had surpassed the sales of America's Triumph and Harley-Davidson. Since Honda was very fond of racing, he decided to start making sports bikes. He would attend various bike races and jot down the special features of the winning bikes. In those times, sports competitions were more than just races. They served as marketing tools for manufacturing companies. Within a few years, Honda launched its first sports bike, which won first place in an international racing competition in 1962. This race made Honda's name famous worldwide. By the 1960s, Honda had become the world's largest motorcycle manufacturing company, and by 1968, it had sold 10 million units. After spending 62 years of his life, Soichiro Honda had finally achieved success, but the dream he had harbored since childhood had not yet been fulfilled. Honda now wanted to venture into car manufacturing as well, despite many people advising against it. In Japan, companies like Toyota and Nissan were already established, making it difficult to carve out a market presence. Honda launched its first pickup truck, the T360, which failed. Then, they launched the sports car 500, of which only 1,300 units were sold. After years of effort and dozens of designs being rejected, finally, in 1972, the Honda Civic was launched, whose newer models are famous worldwide to this day. By the 1980s, Honda Motors was the third largest manufacturing company in Japan, and within just 10 years, it became the third largest in the world. Today, Honda's name is found on cars, motorcycles, boat engines, airplane engines, and dozens of power tools. Soichiro Honda took retirement in 1973, and his journey of life came to a permanent end on August 5, 1991.